You know how people always say, if something feels off, it probably is? I ignored that feeling for months, and it almost cost me my property. Because the truth is, the HOA president didn't just overstep her authority. She moved her friends into my guest house like it belonged to her, and she thought she'd get away with it. She didn't know I was watching. Let me start from the beginning, because this didn't happen overnight. This was a slow, calculated takeover that only failed because I paid attention. When I bought my home, one of the biggest selling points was the detached guest house. It was small, but fully functional. Bedroom, bathroom, kitchenette, separate entrance, completely legal, completely mine. I made sure of that before signing anything. I read the deed, the plat map, the HOA bylaws, everything. And every document said the same thing. The guest house was private property, not a shared asset and not subject to HOA use. At the time, the HOA was tolerable. Annoying, sure, but manageable. Then Karen got elected. She introduced herself as someone who wanted to bring order and raise community standards. What that really meant was more fines, more notices, and more control. Lawn too dry? Warning. Trash bin visible for 5 minutes too long? Fine. She walked around with a clipboard like she was conducting inspections for a prison yard. I kept my head down. I fixed what needed fixing. I didn't argue. And because of that, she mostly ignored me. Or so I thought. About 6 months into her presidency, Karen started talking about community space issues. At HOA meetings, she'd casually mention how the neighborhood lacked flexibility for guests, contractors, or temporary housing needs. Every time she said that, her eyes would drift toward me, toward my lot. I didn't like it, but I still didn't think she'd crossed that line. Then came the meeting where everything changed. Karen announced that the HOA board had identified underutilized structures within the community that could serve HOA-related purposes. No addresses, no details, just vague language. When I raised my hand and asked if privately owned structures were included, she smiled and said, "We're still reviewing documentation." That night, I checked my paperwork again. Nothing had changed. The HOA had no claim, no authority, no right. So I relaxed. That was my second mistake. A few weeks later, I had to travel for work. I was gone for 10 days. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it. But something told me to double-check my security cameras before I left. I made sure every angle was covered. Driveway, side yard, guest house entrance, just in case. 3 days into my trip, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. Then another. Then another. At first, I ignored them. Wind, birds, neighbors walking by. But later that evening, curiosity kicked in. I opened the app, and my heart dropped. There was a car in my driveway. Not my car, not a neighbor's. And then I saw 2 people get out, walk straight to the guest house, and unlock it. Unlock it with a key. I froze. I rewound the footage, watched it again. Slower this time. They didn't hesitate. No confusion, no knocking. They walked in like they belonged there. Over the next 48 hours, it got worse. Another car arrived, then another. Suitcases, boxes, a mattress, groceries. At one point, someone carried in a TV. These people weren't visiting. They were settling in. And then I saw her. Karen walked into frame like she owned the place. She pointed at the building, she laughed, she handed something, keys, to one of her friends. She even waved at my main house, casually explaining something like a real estate agent giving a tour. I felt sick. But I didn't call her. I didn't confront her. I didn't alert the HOA. Instead, I watched. Every single day, I documented everything. Every entry, every exit, every license plate. I saved the footage in multiple locations. I backed it up. I organized it by date and time. I even recorded audio from one clip where her friend joked about free housing thanks to Karen. That clip alone was gold. While they got comfortable, I got prepared. I contacted a property attorney, sent him the footage, sent him the HOA bylaws, sent him the emails Karen had sent to the community. His response was simple. This is trespassing and abuse of authority. So I waited. I wanted Karen confident. I wanted her careless. After a week, I returned home. I didn't announce myself. I didn't post in the HOA group. I waited until evening when all the lights in the guest house were on. Then I walked over and knocked. A stranger opened the door. He smiled and asked if I was here for the HOA. I told him calmly, "No, I'm the owner of this property." Karen appeared behind him. I will never forget her face in that moment. She tried to recover fast, laughing nervously, telling her friends it was just a misunderstanding. That's when I pulled out my phone. I showed her the footage. Her friends watched silently as clip after clip played. Dates, times, audio, everything. Karen stopped smiling. Her hands started shaking. I told her she had illegally entered my property, distributed keys, and allowed unauthorized occupants to live there. I told her I had legal counsel, and I told her she had exactly 24 hours to vacate the guest house, return all keys, and provide written confirmation, or I'd pursue criminal and civil charges. She tried one last bluff. "You won't win." I already had. By the next morning, the guest house was empty. Keys were returned anonymously, and 2 days later the HOA called an emergency meeting. Karen resigned the same week. No apology, no explanation, just silence. But that silence said everything. Now the guest house sits exactly as it should, empty, secure, and unquestionably mine. The cameras are still running, the HOA keep their distance, and no one has questioned my property boundaries since. Because sometimes the people who abuse power forget one thing. Someone is always paying attention, and sometimes they're watching everything.